The Infinite Baffle subwoofer is about as popular amongst the audio community as flat earth is to science. Not that that's a good comparison, but it is a point of contention between different groups of people in the audio community as to whether it's better or not than more conventional sealed or ported enclosures. The Infinite Baffle subwoofer has some advantages inherent in the design of the application that the subwoofer is used in. One of those advantages is that it can play lower consistently and more smoothly. So if you're looking for transients and lows, the Infinite Baffle is definitely going to give you advantages there. And transients, meaning ability to start and stop a note quickly, like fast kick drums and things of that nature. So yeah, if you're a death metal guy, this is going to give you the sub bass you're looking for. One of the other advantages to Infinite Baffle subwoofers is that they require a lot less power to get into their operating range. And in today's age, power is cheap, so that's not really a huge thing, but it is something to consider because they can also handle less power. You're not going to be this is where the debate starts. Okay, your IB guys will say yes, the Infinite Baffle can get just as loud as a sealed enclosure or a ported enclosure, and then the other side of the fence, they'll say, well, no, your sub will lose control and blah blah blah. And there's points to be made from both sides. Both sides are inherently correct. An Infinite Baffle subwoofer does have to be controlled at the lower end because it will just keep trying to play that low note and lower and lower and lower until it literally tears itself out of the basket. So you have to use a subsonic filter to stop it from trying to reproduce 10 hertz at 130 dB, because it's going to try to do that. Infinite Baffle subwoofers tend to fail mechanically rather than electrically because there's not a lot of power going in them, but there's a whole lot of movement happening. Now, having covered that's the nuts and bolts of the whole operation. An Infinite Baffle situation is whenever you have a subwoofer essentially in a cabinet that's far too large for the subwoofer. So all you're doing is blocking the front wave from getting to the back wave, because if you don't block those waves, they cancel each other out. So as that front wave moves forward, as that sub is doing this, right? As that front wave moves forward, that wave of air is going to go around behind the sub and fill in that vacuum as it's moving forward. So here's your sub moving forward, here's the wave going to the back, and here's it moving back, and here's the wave going to the front. It's just going to keep the air is going to keep going to where the vacuum is, and that's why a sub without any box doesn't make a whole lot of bass. Now if you add a barrier around that sub, those sound waves have a lot further to go to where they can get to that vacuum, and that's what a baffle does, the front of the subwoofer box. Now making a baffle that's infinite means you just go out in an infinite distance, and the sound waves can never get to the back, and it sounds awesome. Well, we know building an infinite box is going to cost a lot because
birch is expensive these days.
So we can't do that. Now what you can do is wrap the listening area in the baffle. So essentially putting yourself inside of the sub box, and you can make the whole world be your sub box. Does that make sense? Right? And inside, and then everything's outside, and then you're where it's awesome. Yeah, I like that idea too. Give me a sub box to live in any day. I'm good with that. So in a car situation, that could mean multiple things. There's what they call a true infinite baffle, then there's what they call a simulated infinite baffle. And these are words that people have just kind of made up for this because they both mean more or less the same thing. A true infinite baffle is whenever you're playing your sub into the outside world. So, say you cut a hole in the roof of your car and you mounted a sub in that. Now, the outside world is your sub box. Your sub is playing in. That is an infinite baffle. It would be a horrible idea, but it is an infinite baffle. A more common approach to that situation is cutting a hole in the bottom of the trunk and building some sort of apparatus back there to allow the subs to play out into the open world but still be inside the car. They use something called a manifold sometimes, where they build like a triangular shaped thing like this and mount the sub here and the sub here, and in the bottom down where my palms are, this is open to the world. So you create this little pyramid, a little well, more like a tent shape in your trunk, and you mount a sub on both sides and cut the hole out in the middle, which allows the air to get out, but also kind of helps to keep the subs from getting in the weather. This is a true infinite baffle. That's with a manifold. Sometimes they just mount it straight to a plate and let it fire, magnet up, and then let it fire down in the ground. And there's just a hole, and if you got into the car and looked up, you'd see the cone of a subwoofer. There's lots of different options, but ultimately it has to play to the outside. And the outside has to be sealed off from the inside. Well, here's one of the caveats come in. Remember I said, the outside has to be sealed off from the inside. Keep that in mind. Now, you look at a cabin of a vehicle, what do you have? You have a leaky box, okay? So, when you've got your sound set up the way you want it and you roll the window down, it's going to change. It may change in ways that you like it, or it may change in ways that you don't like it. But it's going to change because you're now opening that enclosure and you're allowing those sound waves from back there under the trunk to work their way around the vehicle and come in the window. Is it far enough away from the back of the sub to stop, to resist the cancellation? Probably. But it will show up on a meter. If you've got if you're taking a reading of the sound inside the vehicle, whenever you roll the window down, it's going to change. Because it has to. You know, it depends on how low the note is. The lower the note is, the further it goes. You know, so and then the outside, trying to pressurize the outside air enough to where it comes in. You know, think about what you're doing here. You're putting enough air, you're moving air from underneath the vehicle and violently moving it away from that spot, and it has to pressurize the air around the car enough to where the air around the car forces air to come into the car. You may think that's ridiculous, but it happens, and it's measurable and it's consistent. It definitely happens. So that's the way you'd apply it in a car. That's the true infinite baffle. Then there's what they call a trunk baffle or a simulated baffle, and that's where, like, for example, your woofers are in the back dash of your car playing into the trunk. The trunk is obviously way too large and leaky for a box, but it technically does provide some acoustic resistance. Not a lot, but it does. In this case, you're separating the cab from the trunk. The trunk being the non-listening area, and the cab being the listening area. And the wall where the seat and the dash meet, that is your outside wall. So your infinite baffle is what that is. You're still pressurizing the cabin the same way you would in the original, but in this case, you're actually playing the sub into another area, a chamber, versus outside. And that's where, again, more of the purists are like, oh no, that's not really an infinite baffle. That's a trunk baffle or something. You know, they go down this hoity-toity hole and start, you know, quoting Shakespeare and shit. So then you've got that scenario. And of course, in a home, you would usually mount it on a large panel. I've seen them on just large panels with open baffles, where you have essentially a big piece of plywood with a woofer mounted in it, and the plywood provides enough of a baffle to stop most. And then you got the ones where they mount it in the wall of the room, and they let the backside play into another room, or they mount it in the ceiling or the floor, let it play into the basement or the attic. Any way it goes, infinite baffle is always a lot more trouble to do than a sealed or ported enclosure of any kind. But let's say you want to embrace the infinite baffleness of a situation and you want to put that to work. So how do you go about doing that? So the question first would be, can any sub play in an infinite baffle? The answer is yes. Any speaker at all can play in an infinite baffle. Should any sub play? That's a whole nother ballgame. You see, okay, first of all, subwoofers in general, pretty much all speakers, are designed to have a QTC of 0.7 to be in their best spot. A QTC is the subwoofer or speakers and the enclosure it's in, whatever that enclosure is, whatever baffle it's in, the combination of all the elements once it's in a system, meaning it's in a box or in a wall or in a baffle. The QTC is the accumulated measurement of how willing that speaker is to move. Okay, that's the best way to explain it. I'm trying to keep this in as much of a basic, understandable, simple format. How hard is it to move the speaker when it's mounted in the enclosure and everything? That's a QTC. The QTS, if you take away everything else and just the driver itself, how willing is it to move by itself? Okay. Think about it as the shocks on a car, the shocks and springs, coilovers. Yeah, we're going to call it that, coilovers. So drivers with a lower than around a 0.7 QTS, okay, drivers with lower than a 0.7 QTS tend to ride like a Cadillac. As long as you're going along a nice smooth road, everything's fine, it's super cushy and super comfortable and perfect. But you try to go take the twisties with it, and you'll find your suspension gets completely bottomed out, twisted up, and the thing goes all cattywampus all of a sudden. Anything lower than 0.7 is soft, cushy, and floppy and sloppy. Okay? But if you take a driver that's a QTS of, say, 5.5 or 0.5, and you put it in an enclosure that raises the QTC to 0.7, now you're back in the happy spot again. The enclosure will always raise, the QTC will always be higher than a QTS. Whatever the QTS is, the enclosure has to make up for that to get it back up to around a 0.7 or higher. A sports car would be like a 1.0. It rides like crap, but it'll handle like a dream. That's a sports car. A 1.0, that's way up there. Again, it's kind of the opposite problem. See, the 0.7 is your happy place. You want to get your QTC in the end to 0.7. Whenever you're playing infinite baffle, you don't really have any control in the situation. There's no enclosure to add to the QTS to get that QTC to 0.7. So you're looking for drivers that have a natural QTS of around 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 0.7. These are all pretty good. 0.7 is where you really want to be, right in that area. Actually, it's 0.77 to be honest, or 0.707 is the magic spot. But we're not gonna pick it apart. If you find a driver that's got like a 0.65 QTS, it's going to play lows a little bit more. It's also probably going to start getting into mechanical clipping at low frequencies because it just has no control over itself without a box to help it. If you find a driver that's like a 0.79 or a 0.8, it's going to handle everything fine, but it's not going to be able to give you the low extension that you're looking for in the perfect world. Those super deep, 10 hertz, 15 hertz lows that are subsonic, way down there. The sweet spot's 0.7. So you want to be 0.7, somewhere between 0.7 and 0.8. And that range is going to give you what you're looking for in a car in an IB setup. So you have to find a driver with that, a QTS of, between 0.7 and 0.8, somewhere in there. And there's not a lot of them. They exist, but there's not a whole lot of them. So, of course, you can go higher than that. You're just going to, the higher you go up above 0.7, however how that is, the less you're going to be able to reproduce that 15 hertz and 20 hertz and 25 hertz. That's going to slowly, the higher that QTS goes past 7, the further up those very lowest notes are going to go. And the scale of that, I couldn't tell you. It's going to vary from driver to driver, and just know that you want to be around 0.7 to 0.8. The next thing you're going to want to look at, if you find multiple drivers that are 0.7, okay, this is a 0.7, it's 15 inches. This is a 0.7, it's 15 inches. So, which is the best? You're starting to pick now. What you're going to look for then is drivers that have larger VAS numbers. What's important is bigger number VAS is better. So if you find a driver that you like, a bunch of drivers you like, the prices are all good, and you're trying to weed out the best of the best, the higher VAS number is going to be better for infinite baffle. And the VAS is a combination of comparing the driver's stiffness to the amount of airspace, it's to the amount of cone area stiffness equation. And again, it's not important. Just know that bigger is better when it comes to infinite baffle or large enclosures. So most of your drivers designed to go in cars, now I'm not talking about subs here, I'm talking about mid-bass and mid-range door speakers, coaxials, components. Most of the drivers designed to go in cars have a QTS, which is the speaker alone's, a QTS of around 0.7, because almost all the locations that car audio drivers are going to go are infinite baffle. You think about it. The rear deck of a car, the doors, there's no box there. It's just a baffle that's big and with holes all in it. So most car audio drivers have a QTS of 0.7. Most subwoofers do not, because they are anticipated that they'll be going into a sealed or ported enclosure. So ultimately, if you're looking for an infinite baffle setup, you're going to want a nice rigid mounting surface. You're going to want a subwoofer with a Q factor of 0.7 or higher. You know what the trade-offs are for going higher than that. And you know what the trade-offs are for going lower than that, and what you'd have to do to make that work. And you're going to want an environment where you can more or less keep the backside of that baffle away from the listening area, because that's going to give you optimum situation. And beyond that, adventurous attitude, willingness to make a hole in something, because it doesn't matter where you're going to put the infinite baffle, you're going to make a hole in something that surrounds you. That's just the nature of the beast. And I'm studying on whether I'm going to do something like this in my Tahoe. I just revel in the fact that I know that lots of people have made big holes in very expensive cars over the years, and they are beautiful. So it's just It's that first cut, man. It's like getting your first tattoo. You're like, oh man, you know, you got to jump off the bridge and just go for it. So now you guys know a little more about subwoofers and a couple of the pieces that you can look for to decide what applications you're good at, because stuff that makes an infinite baffle sub good also make a sealed enclosure sound better. A big one. You just want to get that Q factor, that QTC, the total Q, up to around 0.7. You know it's going to be in the honey spot. If you want to play hard and fast, you want to get it a little higher than that. If you want to play low and sexy, you want to keep it around 0.7 or maybe just a little below that. You know. But hopefully I've given you guys some new knowledge and not overwhelmed your brain with too many specifications, because I hate mathing and I'm not going to get into it. I'm more of a concept guy, not so much of an analytic guy. Hopefully this was helpful, guys. If it was, please hit this button right here, because I need subscribers, and you guys are doing awesome, by the way. Please throw some comments down in there, because that helps my YouTube algorithm. It gives me more viewers, more people watch my stuff. And I've just started doing this full time as my job because of some medical reasons, and I need the action. Thanks, guys. Peace.